I'm Bob Ryder, and I'm eager to share with you my enthusiasm for sculpture. Anyone can sculpt. Like anything else, sculpture is a learned skill. We're not born with a gene for sculpting. However, one must develop the artist's eye. The artist's eye is the ability to see in proportions. As a teacher of sculpture, I've watched students develop the artist's eye very rapidly by using a technique of measurement that has little to do with a ruler. Interested? Follow me while I demonstrate this technique in a sculpture of Dr. Robert Calzini from photographs. In the world of art education, the use of photographs to teach sculpture is frowned upon. The objection is reasonable if we're talking about a single image. Logically, you can't create a three-dimensional image from a single two-dimensional picture. But this objection has no validity if there are multiple photos taken at 45-degree increments as the subject rotates. The subject must be encouraged to maintain the same head posture while rotating. Beneath each of the first 5 pictures on this display board, there is a simply constructed and even easier to use graph. We'll come back to this graph momentarily. There are 5 additional views which do not contain graphs. These views do not lend themselves to the measurement protocol. They are, however, very useful and will be discussed as we proceed in the demonstration. Having decided on the size of the bust you're going to make, you could arithmetically set up a proportion between the photograph you're going to use and the size of the bust you want to make. In our example, we have decided to make an 8-inch head is measured from the chin to the top of the skull. That sets up a proportion between the photograph and the statue. All the features in the face will share the same proportion. That is to say, the length of the nose and the width of the mouth will maintain the same proportionate measurement when transferred to your statue. The graph that you see here is simply a depiction of that unchanging proportion. Instead of using the total skull height of 8 inches, we will use that which is a constant measurement, the distance between the eye and the chin. 1/2 of the skull height. This allows us to use a more manageable graph size. The graph paper we will use is 1/4 inch squares. So the horizontal line on our graph will be marked at the 4-inch measurement and is labeled statue. The vertical line, the y-axis, is determined by a measurement of the photograph from chin to eye line. No need for a ruler here, you simply use a caliper and transfer that measurement to the graph at the 4-inch point. A third line is a construct between the horizontal and the vertical line and forms the hypotenuse of a right angle. How do we use this? Well, how do we use our photos and this graph in making our statue? Let's ask the question, how long should the nose be? Using a caliper, we go to the photograph and measure the length of the nose from a point called nasion. This is nasion right here. from nasion to the bottom of the nose. Transfer that to our graph, keeping this horizontal
Parallel
to the vertical line, and we find that it ends up at a point on the graph that is labeled 9. We then open our caliper to go from the apex to number 9, and that is the length of the nose, the length of the nose that we're going to need for our statue, period. Let's do another one. Let's ask, how wide should the mouth be on our statue? Again, we go to the photograph, simply measure the width of the mouth, come to our graph, find out what is the appropriate position where the ends of the caliper lie on both lines, and in this case that happens to come to 9.5. We then open this caliper to 9.5, and that is the width of our mouth. We're going to be doing more of these measurements as we go along. I will try to speed up the film during those passages of the construction of our statue so that we're not wasting a lot of time watching a laborious addition or subtraction of clay. There's little to be learned by these additions and subtractions, but I will stop the tape at the point where it is significant to demonstrate something that I would like you to know. The clay we will use for our demonstration is water-based clay. It usually comes in 25-pound packages wrapped in plastic, which keeps it moist for a long period of time. Because water-based clay has a certain amount of plasticity necessary to its function, it is important that we use a support, or in the parlance of sculptors, an armature. In this case, our armature is made of 1/2-inch pipe. You can get these in varying lengths from your hardware or plumbing supply store. They are screwed into a 1/2-inch floor flange, which is then attached to a wooden base. Because clay is heavy, the clay that is attached to this armature will have the tendency to migrate down on the pipe. Eventually, if you're making a head on this clay, the top of this pipe will extrude through the top of the skull. To prevent this, it is necessary to wrap the top of this with either a paper wad, or in this case I'm going to use a tennis ball. This in effect increases the surface area and prevents the clay from migrating downward. A segment of clay is cut off using a wire clay cutter. I'm doing this one at approximately 3/4 of an inch. It is then attached to our tennis ball and armature, like so. Additional increments are added. And I will continue to do this until we have a kind of a basic form for a skull. A skull with approximately 5 inches allowed for the neck. From this point on, clay is added or subtracted until we obtain a primitive head and chest. There is nothing to be gained by watching me work through this buildup. Therefore, I have liberally edited this tape in order to focus on the important issues. This is a good point for us to stop and consider what we have accomplished. I've continued to add clay until we arrived at this generally egg-shaped head. I have taken some measurements to determine the width of the skull and checked also that the front to back distance is appropriate, as well as the vertical distance. Let's inscribe a midline here. Midlines are important is they help us to establish symmetry. And immediately on this midline, I see that I'm pretty good in the upper part of the face, but the chin is a little bit wide, or conversely, a little bit narrow on this side. The thing we want to talk about is facial mapping. In order to determine how far up the mouth ought to be, I'm going to measure it from the chin point up. And I do this after having established a permanent reference point, which in this case is with a skewer. I'll put that at the chin, and we'll cut this off so that only enough remains in front to allow us to have a good, secure measuring point. So we go to our photograph and we measure from the wet line, the wet line is that point that is between the lips. It's conventionally called the wet line. So we take that measurement, come to our chart, and I see that it's measuring about 6 3/4. I'll go back to the apex, go to 6 3/4, come back to my statue, and make a mark. So that's where the mouth is going to be. Let's next locate the bottom of the nose. Again, using our reference point, the chin, we're going to measure from the bottom of the nose to the chin point. Take that same distance to the chart, and that measures at 10. And we then carry that distance to our reference skewer on the bottom here, and there is going to be the bottom of the nose. Let's again establish the eye line. We have done that when we determined this here, but just for the sake of completeness, I'm going to do it again. That is the eye line. Lo and behold, we did it right the first time, which we carry to the statue. There's our eye line. You want to take one more measurement, and that is the measurement to the brow line. From the chin point to the brow line is like so. It registers at 19.5. And our brow ridge will be right there. Let me just extend these lines just a little bit. This is the eye line. This is the bottom of the nose. This will be the mouth. And this, the brow line. Having done that, we are now ready to start. Our sculpture. There are going to be, we'll start with the orbits, the bony sockets for the eye. We allow about 1/4 of an inch on each side here. Sweeping up to the brow line and back. So now we have 2 bony orbits. And I'm going to use the clay that I took out there to provide a bit of a brow bone on the top. The segment between the eyes, there's always a dip. If we look at the skull from the side, let me use this picture here. If we use the skull from the side, there's always a dip here from the brow into the start of the nasal bone. This area is labeled nasion. I'm going to simply take out some of that material. And we've started our face. The next is to apply a nose. And the nose is simply a triangle. We know how long it has to be. Well, it appears I have erased my nasal line here, so I will take it again very quickly. You probably remember that this was 9.5. I didn't, but now we'll go back to the statue, and there's our nose line. So that's the point to which we want to bring our little nasal triangle. And I simply form a little triangle, apply it to the face. Remember, the nasal line was way in there, so we're going to cut that off. have the start of a nose. A question you may want to ask at this point is, how wide should the nose be? We can take a measurement. I've got 6.5. And come back to the statue to see if in fact we have made the nose wide enough. Now that's pretty good. Okay, the next is to add the mouth and continue with the features, refining them as necessary until we get a more reasonable approximation of Dr. Calzini's face. We have arrived at our point in this sculpting process where we have completed much of what we need to do in terms of facial features. You'll notice that I have not done eyes or ears. The face probably looks a little more angular to you at this point than you'd like to see. It is not our intent to sculpt like SpongeBob, but the facets that you see here are not unlike the facets in a diamond. At a distance, the diamond looks round. When you get up close, you see that it is a series of flat planes. It's called sculpting in planes. The advantage of this is that it allows you to see whether or not you have good facial symmetry. I leave the eyes to last because the eyes are so captivating that I'm apt to spend hours perfecting an eye only to discover that it doesn't fit with the rest of the face. Everybody's favorite artist, John Singer Sargent, advised that the face should be painted first and that the eyes dropped in at the end like fried eggs on a plate. The ears I leave to last because ears are so easily distorted while working on the hair and facial features. What I want to talk about here is the way to position the ears. For the moment, let's return to the old standby, the caliper. With our caliper, we make a measurement from, let's say, nasion to the top middle point of the ear. We then carry that to our graph. In this case, that measures 16.5. We open our caliper up to 16.5. Return to our statue and apply that measurement directly to the statue. Right? It's wrong because these 2 points between the nose and the ear are not in the same spatial plane. There's a great deal of distance between here and here. That situation does not exist when we're taking measurements on the front of the face, which is relatively flat. So, what to do? To answer this, I must introduce you to another kind of compass, which I'm going to call the sliding caliper. That's a pretty pretentious name that I've assigned to a humble compass. This one comes from the stationery section of my local drugstore. Instead of a pencil, I have added a 5/16" dowel, which I have sharpened to a point and which I have been using as a pointer throughout this demonstration. At 5/16 of an inch, the dowel will fit exactly into the compass, and we can take the 2 ends, bring them together, come to our photograph, and take the measurement that we're interested in. We carry that measurement to our graph, measuring 17, and we now have the measurement that we want to bring to our statue. The difference now is that we have a caliper, one arm of which we can extend. And now we place this at right angles to Nasion. See, it's better if I turn this so that, there we go. Where the metal part of this sliding mechanism touches the ear is the point at which we want to bring the top of the ear, and that's right at this point here. That determines for us the front to back positioning of the ear. It tells us nothing about the vertical positioning, and we will discuss that in a little bit. It is important to understand that the placement of the ear, as we have demonstrated here, is simply an opportunity to show you the sliding caliper. And the instrument is not limited to placement of ears, but should be used anytime it is necessary to obtain a measurement that crosses a spatial plane. Note that I am saying spatial planes, that's S-P-A-T-I-A-L, spatial planes, as opposed to facial, F-A-C-I-A-L, facial planes. When I started this project, I really believed I could share with you everything I had learned about modeling the portrait in clay. Unfortunately, I ran out of time. It is recommended that a video not exceed 7 minutes in length. In order to do a more in-depth demonstration in modeling, I need to do another video. In the meantime, I suggest you check out excellent videos right here on YouTube by Tit Toland, that's T-O-L-A-N-D, and Philippe Farraut, that's F-A-R-A-U-T. I'm in the process of publishing a book on this material. If you live on or near Cape Cod, I teach this course at the Falmouth Artists Guild. Let's at least look at how this project finished up. 3 things I would like to emphasize. Sculpting is not a genetic endowment. If you can tie your shoes, you can sculpt. It is a question of training, not talent. Secondly, learning to sculpt from photographs is a valuable skill. Moreover, photos are a modest expense that allows us to work in the comfort of our home. Thirdly, the non-mathematical measuring technique will help the beginner develop the artist's eye and will help the experienced sculptor save time and develop accuracy.